Hi, it's Julie Beeling with Beneath Sheep's Clothing and the People's Network. And I wanted to record a video. I was communicating with someone on X the other day and talking about Kamala Harris. And I mentioned, well, she's kind of communist, so I'm not really interested in having Kamala Harris as my president. And a bunch of people agreed with me. And then the guy in the post who it was, he was like, yeah, that's just a talking point. That's not true. Tell me how that's true. And I'm like, well, I actually have a lot to say about it. And so I'm recording this video to answer the question, how is Kamala Harris communist? But actually, that's actually not the most important question, if you ask me, because it's really not just about Kamala Harris. There is way more to the story in terms of communism being a threat to America. Kamala Harris is one aspect of what I believe to be an imminent threat, but we've been under threat to communist agendas and tactics, and this has been happening in America for over 100 years. We need to ask the question, how have America's institutions been influenced by communism, Marxism, or infiltrated by communism and Marxism? Why is that a problem? What is communism to begin with? And is it just Kamala Harris? Like she's like the main person leading this? Or is there a whole cabal of people? I'll answer that. There's a whole cabal. This has been going on for over a century, but we're in the end stages now of a takeover, a communist takeover of culture in America. Once the culture is sufficiently taken over, then the rest can proceed forward. That is the threat that we are facing at this time. So what is communism? And, you'll argue with people and they'll have these like economic definitions, but let's backtrack to what is socialism. Socialism, which is more palatable to Americans and Westerners than hardcore communism. Socialism is when the government, well, they say it's the people that own the means of production, but that's really not possible. So it's the government that owns the means of production. They own it on behalf of the people, supposedly, and where there's wealth redistribution. And when you're looking at what's the difference between socialism and communism, there's a few ways of looking at it. One, communism is where there's a violent revolution to bring in socialism. Then you'll have people argue, oh, that's not really communism. Communism has never been actually successfully implemented. We haven't gotten there yet. Yeah, because it's this fairy tale utopia where everyone is equal. There is no disparity between anyone. It's basically heaven on earth, a godless heaven on earth, where it's, everyone has what they need. Nobody is lacking for anything. No one's oppressed. That sounds nice, but in reality, every society that has attempted to implement communism, you end up with three things. You end up with, and this is where my specialty is looking at not like some technical definition, but the actual fruits of communism. Having myself lived in Russia in the late 90s, having gone to graduate school to study Russian and East European studies, Russian language and literature, and then writing my master's thesis on the topic of underground Christian movements in the Soviet Union, their survival tactics, the tactics of the Soviet state to dismantle Christianity. I learned quite a lot about what communism is and what it does. And then I wrote the book Beneath Sheep's Clothing. The film Beneath Sheep's Clothing, based on my book, came out earlier this year, just in August. Communism promises that it's going to help uplift the oppressed. In the Soviet Union, they promised bread, land, and peace to the peasants. Well, they took all three of those away, even more than what the czars had done. Communism promises that it's going to uplift the underprivileged, but instead what it does is it brings impoverishment, mass enslavement, and mass death to the populace. Those are the main major fruits of communism that cannot be denied. But they're doing it all in the name of, we're going to help the underprivileged, we're going to help you. So another thing to keep in mind about communism, people are thinking, oh, it's the economics. The economics of like the command economy, what the Soviets had, they realized that didn't work. And so look at China, for instance. China adapted and changed their economics to be more of a fascist economic setup. There are businesses in China, but the government has control over them essentially. But then you have the communist social controls, you have the mass censorship, you have the brainwashing in the schools. And all of what this is outlined explaining how communists take over a culture. That's what my book is about, and my film, Beneath Sheep's Clothing. Another feature of communism is taking something that's true and that resonates with a lot of people, especially people who are underprivileged or people who care about the underprivileged. It takes this truth about that and it validates it. And so a lot of people resonate with it, but then it marries it, fuses it to a lie. So for instance, Black Lives Matter. That's an obvious truth that 99 point whatever plus percent of the population would be like, absolutely, the lives of Black people matter, 100%. But then Black Lives Matter, the organization, a Marxist organization, they admitted themselves, the founders of Black Lives Matter, they're trained Marxists. Now their solution is we're going to have unrest and rioting in the streets. Too bad, so sad if maybe some, businesses get destroyed, maybe some people get killed. No matter that it doesn't actually help, no matter that the money that Black Lives Matter takes in goes for like big mansions and whatever else that didn't actually help any Black lives. But they're doing it in the name of Black lives, and so that's really what counts. So that's what we have to be careful of is these nice sounding things, but then what are the fruits of those things that they say that they're going to do? Now, another thing we need to keep in mind, so communism mutates to take over its host wherever it is. And earlier in the 20th century, it's like 1920s, this Italian Marxist, Antonio Gramsci, he was acknowledging that Western nations were not falling to communism as they had hoped. And so he laid out a plan. Well, he actually diagnosed the problem. The problem is that Western cultural institutions were too robust. They repelled communism. And so the way that the West would need to be kind of massaged over a period of years and decades to prepare it to accept communism would be an infiltration of these culture-making institutions to change those institutions, change the culture, and then the communism could be able to be implemented. And those five institutions that Antonio Gramsci laid out that would need to be infiltrated in the West were the media, the schools, the churches, the family, and the legal system. And so all of these institutions and more began to be infiltrated with communists over 100 years ago. So there's many waves of different types of infiltration. The earliest that I've seen of communism in America was actually homegrown. And this is where I need to get to talking about the pyramid of communist enablers in America. Because we've seen outright communists here, but they're like fringe, so it's like, no, those are fringe. No one is paying much attention to those people who are avowed communists. The avowed communists who are openly acknowledging that they're communist in America, those are fringe, and those are not the most important group of people that have brought America to the point that it's at now, where we're in the end stages of a Marxist cultural revolution. Don't have time to get into all the details. Once again, you got to watch my film Beneath Sheep's Clothing to get a really good basic understanding of that. So let's go back to this pyramid. So at the very top, you have the money bags and the puppet masters, the people who are funding this infiltration, the people who are pulling the strings. They themselves not being communists. Now, in America, there you can point to a few different places, but one of the main ones is you have like the Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation. You actually have these robber barons and their foundations to uplift humanity that are then funding communists, avowed communists, to infiltrate the churches, education, and et cetera, et cetera. Today in America, we have like the money bags, let's say, of like a George Soros. That's just one of there's many others, Bill Gates, for example. So that's who you have at the top of the pyramid of the people who are enabling the communist agendas and bringing it into America. Then you have the avowed communists, one level down from that. Still, that's just the very tip of the pyramid. The next group is quite large, and this is your leftists, your progressives, your democratic socialists, and people in America that they really like the messaging of uplifting the underprivileged. And many of these people have good intentions. They don't want people of color to be oppressed, and they hate racism. They hate misogyny. Great. Well-intended people that that are like, yeah, and then they become fighting for it, become progressives. They don't want, they don't want to go the full distance of, let's say, the communists, where that they're like promoting like a violent revolution, a violent overthrow of society. This next level, the fellow travelers, they just really are the ones that are the most effective, however, at pushing this leftist agenda that is pushing us towards communism. And we've had many people in power in America, in the culture and politically, over many decades, who fall into this camp. And again, many of them actually with good intentions, not wanting to see the overthrow of America. So now the next level down is the dupes. And these are your just run-of-the-mill people who they hear the slogan Black Lives Matter, and they're like, yeah. And so they are not really digging into the details. They're not like, really the ones that are like making things happen, but they agree with the nice sounding agendas. And they're like, sure, they're duped by it. I will add one more level. Those are our level 1 dupes. I'll add the next level of dupes, the level 2 dupes, as I call them, who are people who are like, I'm not sure, there's something kind of off about that slogan. I'm not sure they're actually helping Black lives by their mostly peaceful protests, burning cities. Something seems kind of weird about that, but then they keep quiet. So these level 2 dupes are also enabling these agendas. So over many decades, America's institutions have been infiltrated. Now, Kamala Harris represents a class of people in America who would be called the red diaper babies, where her parents were communists. Her dad was actually a Marxist economic professor from the very beginning. And so I'm going to be now citing a little bit from Trevor Loudon's book that's coming out in a few days from the recording of this video, called Stealth, and it's about the communist ties and background of Kamala Harris. And I was able to read the manuscript, and suffice it to say, there's enough content for a whole book to describe the communist background and ties and the grooming of Kamala Harris within this communist group of class of people in America. And these are people, some of them would fall into the avowed communist category, but others like Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, they are not avowed communists, but they are trained in that vein, and they're operating in stealth. They're operating as wolves in sheep's clothing to sound more moderate than what they actually are, than what their actual intentions are. And we have many of these people in power in America right now. Kamala Harris is one of many. But to have someone as president at this very time when we're already teetering on the edge culturally, that's very dangerous, in my opinion. So people talk about Donald Trump and he's a dangerous fascist, and he's they're going to be this threat to America. And let's look at the actual evidence for that. We actually had Trump in office for 4 years. What threats were there to America? Some people will say January 6th was a threat to America. Okay, yeah, that's the media talking point, but where's the actual evidence that Trump was inciting people? I had this conversation with a family member of mine about a month or two ago. She's like, yeah, Donald Trump, his violent rhetoric. And I'm like, what violent rhetoric? Oh, he's inciting people to violence. Really? Give me an example. And every example this family member gave me, I was like, it was fake. The bloodbath, the line, and by that way, that Kamala Harris used a lot of these hoaxes in her in that debate. She mentioned them as if they were real. The bloodbath one, that was Donald Trump saying that if Harris or if Biden at the time would be reelected, there would be a bloodbath, an economic bloodbath for the automotive industry, but that if Trump would be put back in, he would change the trajectory of things so that the automotive industry in America would still be able to be profitable. There are so many examples. The fine people hoax, where Trump supposedly said that the neo-Nazis were fine people. He actually said, in his actual quote is that he was not referring to the white supremacists. He specifically said that's at the time he said that, fine people, that he was not referring to white supremacists and neo-Nazis. But the media conveniently cut that part out. Hoax after hoax of Trump's violent rhetoric that makes him so dangerous that we can't have him in office, and that I'm sorry, there's the evidence for that is very, very thin. Plus we've seen what he does. But Kamala Harris, if you look at her background, you look that her parents were very heavily involved in communist Marxist organizations. You look at herself, her being involved in these organizations herself from early childhood. You look at who funded her. It was a man named Steve Phillips, a Maoist, follower of Mao's communist China. He also is the one who funded Barack Obama and many others. But this San Francisco group of far left progressive Marxists, Maoists, communists that she was tight with. You also have like Dianne Feinstein, you have a bunch of people. So it's not just Kamala Harris by any stretch of the imagination, but she's part of this cabal, and she was groomed by this cabal, and she is acting as if she's a moderate, trying to say moderate things out of one side of her mouth. But if you look at her whole background, read Trevor Loudon's book, Stealth, when it comes out in a few days, and you'll see this goes back to Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition. So with Kamala Harris, what's the evidence? People say that it's hyperbole to say that she's a communist. I already explained how there's very, very little to zero evidence that Trump is a fascist or would be a fascist dictator if reelected. What is the evidence that Kamala Harris would be pushing America further towards communism? Well, she has communist parents. She has close connections with communist organizations and has her entire life. Funded into public service by Steve Phillips, a Maoist. She spouts Marxist catchphrases, being unburdened by what has been. She promises some communist policies. She's mentioned price controls, mandatory gun buybacks, taxing of unrealized capital gains, but then she likes to lie and distort those things, and she tries to speak out of both sides of her mouth. We have got a Kamala Harris who is supported by a very deeply subverted media that has been wrong about many, many things and lied about many things, overinflated the danger and the threat of COVID, the lies, the nonstop lies and hatecraft about President Trump. We have a subverted entertainment industry. Look at what's happening with P. Diddy. Many of the people of the stars in the music industry, and also this goes for Hollywood as well, they've made deals. They're bought. They've been purchased. They're not free to speak their true opinions. They must be a part of this basically beast system that they have sold their souls to, and they're owned. So you have a bunch of these entertainers coming out in support of Kamala Harris. Maybe some of them, maybe it's legit from the depths of their souls, but these people are many bought and paid for. We have our whole education system, both university and K through 12 now, very deeply subverted with brainwashing our children. They become communist re-education camps for our children, to weaponize our children against freedom and against family, against their own families if their families are conservative. Our churches are very deeply subverted. Again, the schools and the churches and how that has happened both historically and in the Soviet Union and in America, that's mainly what Beneath Sheep's Clothing goes into. Hour and 45 minutes, hard-hitting, highly informative. Go to beneathsheepsclothing.movie to watch it. I promise you, you will never see things the same again. We have a Kamala Harris who's picked a running mate, who's been to China several dozen times. He is a Maoist. He himself, he's a big supporter, and so is Harris, of the medical mutilation of children, genital mutilation of children, and castration of children who believe that they are of the other gender because the media and the schools are feeding this into them. And many of these are the most vulnerable children, autistic children that already feel like they don't fit in, are now being brainwashed to think that they're the wrong gender and that they need to get healthy body parts chopped off. Harris Walls support that. Kamala Harris purports to be for the people, but which people is that? What did she do for the people as vice president when she facilitated these open borders where we have mass migration of, look, I have nothing against anyone who's looking for a better life, but can't just open the border to the world and then be like, sure, come here and we're going to put you up in a hotel and we're going to give you an allowance every month. And no. And then we have, enemy combatants allegedly also coming across the border, certain countries emptying their prisons allegedly. The crime rate's out of control. We have this defunding of police. We have the criminals are being allowed to run rampant more and more, especially in our big cities. And then the justice system weaponized against conservatives. This is very backward and very dangerous. It's dangerous for the ongoing existence of America as a free nation. That's what we got from Kamala Harris as vice president these last 3.5 years. Our grocery prices are freaking out of control. No, she's not for the people. Once again, communists lie. If you can trust one thing, you can trust that communists lie and they tell you, we're going to do this and this and this for you. But what has she done? That speaks louder than words. What did Trump do when he was in office? Our economy was great. COVID obviously changed that to a degree, and that brought a whole lot of other things into the picture. But COVID aside, we were extremely prosperous under Trump. One more thing I'll mention in terms of communist policies. So we don't just have communist China that is perhaps exerting influence in America, and there's a lot of evidence that it is and has for a long time. Of course, when the Soviet Union was solvent, they had espionage activity, but they also had ideological subversion activities to subvert nations to try to make them communist. But we also have global entities like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum that are a huge threat, that are not avowed communists themselves, but they have policies that, using nice sounding platitudes and very nice sounding things like, oh, we're going to eradicate poverty and we're going to eradicate racism and we're going to have clean air and clean up the earth, all these nice sounding things, but we need you to give us all the power so we can do these nice sounding things. That's what communism is in practice. It is a maximum consolidation of power in the name of all these nice sounding things. And then when that power is then centralized in these few hands, they don't give it up. They don't want the people to rise up to take back their power. The people have to be disarmed. The people have to be censored, silenced, and tightly controlled. They have to be punished if they go against it. So we have to be very skeptical, and there's some very dangerous things, and that's also covered somewhat in Beneath Sheep's Clothing with some of the people I interviewed. So it's not just people in power in the US, not just people in communist China, but we actually have the UN and global entities that are pushing agendas that are very dangerous, that are bringing in a communist society. Again, communist married with fascism, and honestly, I'll say married with some monopoly capitalism as well. That's my 2 cents on, is Kamala Harris communist? Would she bring communism into America? Absolutely. She would push America, because we're already on the edge at this point. She and Walz and all of this cabal behind them would try to push America over the edge, and because of how deeply subverted we already are. We have to keep them out of the White House. We all need to vote for President Trump. He's already proven that he is pro-America. Please watch Beneath Sheep's Clothing to get a greater understanding and greater context. Go to beneathsheepsclothing.movie. Get Trevor Loudon's book on the communist background and ties of Kamala Harris. You can go to Trevor Loudon, TrevorLoudon.com to pre-order his book or purchase his book if it's out, if you're watching this after the fact. Please understand, please share this video. Thank you so much.